The Price of Treason, a Broken Realms short story. Give 'em a volley! Sergeant Haskell tasted the bitter tang of Valkamite as flame and smoke erupted from the barrels of a dozen muskets. The disciplined fire cut down a score of the advancing enemy, each well-aimed ball punching a hole through steel plate, flesh, and bone. But it was not enough. More elven warriors came striding across the sodden ground, the tips of their long spears gleaming in the mist, their tower shields locked in perfect formation. One of their number held aloft a profane banner emblazoned with foul iconography and two familiar and despised words: Har Curon. Har Curon. That was the name the Cainites and their fellow insurrectionists had given to Haskell's home city of Anvilgard, the city they had sacked in the name of the arch-traitor Morathi. Haskell's hatred all but choked him. So many comrades dead and lost, and soon the sorry remnants of his command would join them. This time, there would be no retreat. "Second ranks, fire!" he roared, and another rippling volley scythed across the enemy. Then the elven spearmen were at the foot of their makeshift barricades. With eerie calmness, they began to haul themselves over the muddy ridge, ignoring the bayonets that jabbed them down. "It's been an honor, lads," Haskell said. "Let's show these faithful curs how Charwind Rangers meet their fate." Not for nothing were the Rangers considered elite soldiers amongst the ranks of Anvilgard's Free Guild. Haskell's platoon fought like angered griffhounds, taking up hatchets, daggers, and billy clubs and hurling themselves into the fray. But the enemy numbered at least 30 to their paltry dozen. And they were not exhausted and starving from weeks of flight through the sweltering jungles of the Charwind coast. With cold focus and dexterous skill, the elven warriors drove Haskell's soldiers to the ground, impaling them with precise thrusts of their spears or battering them into unconsciousness with the skull-marked bosses of their shields. "Traitors!" Haskell roared. The sergeant flipped his musket, catching it by the barrel and swinging the heavy ironwood stock underneath a raised shield to sweep an oncoming elf off his feet. The elf rolled and came up with blinding speed, his eyes as blank and emotionless as those of a flayer shark. With one hand, Haskell cleared his pistol from its holster and fired. There was an eruption of pink mist as his enemy was sent toppling away. Dropping the musket, Haskell cracked open the breech of his pistol and rammed home another bullet. The ranks of the elven spearmen opened, and a figure strode regally through the gap. Pale skin, glistening in the fading light, she wore a robe of midnight and carried a forked staff of gold. A thick mane of white hair whipped about her cruel, angular features as she fixed her gaze upon Haskell. The sergeant raised his pistol, but before he could even squeeze the trigger, the elf woman uttered a single harsh word. Agonizing pain enveloped Haskell from head to toe, as if his skin were immersed in boiling acid, and frenzied rats were clawing their way loose from his innards. He toppled to the marshy ground, grasping and writhing, grinding his teeth together so fiercely that he felt them splinter in his mouth. Blood poured from his eyes and nose. Through a blurry haze of agony, he saw the elf witch approach, staring down at him as if he were nothing more than a bug she had crushed beneath her toes. "Tedious creatures," she said. "Do you lack the wit to even understand your time is over?" Haskell tried to curse her as a betrayal, but all he could manage was a wordless moan. "Kill them all," his tormentor said. "And be quick about it. I tire of hunting these parasites." Two of the Witch King's blank-eyed minions loomed over Haskell. As they raised their spears, he closed his eyes and awaited the God King's judgment. "Hold there, Covener!" The clear, commanding voice carried across the clearing, above the groans and wailings of the wounded. Haskell blinked and saw a gleaming spear point hovering a hair's breadth away from his eyeball. The sorceress had raised a hand and now was staring towards a solitary figure draped in a lizard-skin cloak, his hand resting easily upon the hilts of the two jeweled scimitars in his belt. The newcomer was another elf, and judging by his gaudy finery and the tattoos and vicious scars that crisscrossed his bald head, he was of the Scourge. one of the beast-hunting Corsair elves. Any hope that Haskell had a rescue was dashed immediately, for the privateers had been amongst the first to turn their cloaks at Morathi's behest. Indeed, Haskell knew these cold-blooded killers all too well, for the Charwind Rangers had fought beside the Scourge in many a vicious border war. He found himself wishing his fate lay in the Elf Witch's hands after all. "I am Uvith Trask of the Tide Serpent," said the Corsair, "and I lay claim to these prisoners." "You have no authority over me, sea scum," said the sorceress, her words dripping with contempt. "I serve Jerusa Craith herself, and the Coven matron has ordered all loyalists within 100 leagues of Har-Curon to be purged. Begone." The Scourge elf strolled closer, apparently unbowed by the glittering array of spears and repeater bows now aimed in his direction. "The Veleth are ours," he said, "as agreed with Morathi Kane herself. No one denies the Scourge their due, Covener. I will not ask a second time." "You dare threaten me?" spat the Elf Witch. "Seize this fool at once. I will enjoy peeling his skin from his arrogant bones." Several pale-eyed spearmen advanced, spears lowered at Uvith Trask's gut. The bald elf shrugged and raised a slender finger to the skies. So be it. There was a whistling rush of air, and black-flighted bolts grew from the throats of the Elf Witch's thralls. They toppled, twitching, more missiles riddling their frames. Haskell rolled to one side, placing one of the dead elves between him and the sudden storm. Trask's twin scimitars were in his hands in an instant, and he darted across the clearing towards the sorceress, rolling to avoid the bolts of black flame that she hurled at him. Blades clashed upon metal as the Elf Witch lashed out with her staff, her face twisted in fury. More missiles came whipping through the air, cutting down blank-eyed elven warriors in droves, even as they reformed their shield wall with silent efficiency. Then, with blood-curdling cries, figures spilled from the swamp groves all around the clearing. Corsairs and green-cloaked forest elves, but also humans besides, the latter wearing tattered tunics and of black and scarlet. "Anvilgard endures," they roared, as Haskell felt first stirrings of hopes he had known in days. He staggered to his feet and scrambled in the mud for his loaded pistol. His fingers closed around the reassuring coldness of its ironwood grip. No more than a dozen feet away, the Corsair captain exchanged a lightning flurry of blows with the Elf Witch, who parried and slammed her staff into Trask's midriff before locking her weapon horizontally across his neck. "You side with the humans?" she spat, pressing down against the Corsair's throat. "Against your own kind?" "My fate is mine alone to decide," said Trask, face twisted as he tried to break her grip, "and I'll have no part of the Shadow Queen's delusions." Haskell's hands were trembling, but he braced himself against the corpse of a slain elf and took the shot. His aim was true, and the Elf Witch screeched and whirled, clutching at a bloodied shoulder. Her gaze flashed towards him, promising death, and she thrust her hand at his chest like a claw. At that moment, Uvith Trask's twin scimitars plunged into her gut. The sorceress gave a piercing shriek, and then her pitch-black eyes rolled back in her skull. The Corsair eased the corpse free from his blades and turned to Haskell. "Good enough," he said with a grudging nod. Approaching, the elf extended a hand when hauled the sergeant to his feet. Around them, the sounds of battle had faded. Haskell saw his wounded being seen by their rescuers, while Corsairs walked amongst the bodies of the foe, dispatching the survivors with efficient thrusts. "Can you and your people still fight?" said Trask, wiping his blade clean on the dead spearman. "Aye," said Haskell. "But I don't understand. Why?" "Because not every elf in Anvilgard wants to be a part of this madness," said Trask. "And because there are those of us in the Scourge fleets who know not to mistake a mask of benevolence for the serpent's face beneath. Take up your weapons. There's a great deal of killing to be done." Alright friends, so let's talk about this little tale. I actually really like this one. This was a part of the Broken Realms Morathi book that I wanted them to spend more time on. And so it's after, Morathi ascends to godhood. I'm going to spoil it here because I'm assuming you guys have watched my coverage on it. But Morathi has already ascended to godhood, and now she is taking over the city of Anvilgard. If you don't know, Anvilgard is one of these cities that exists in these Cities of Sigmar Battletome, and basically in the story, her forces took it and renamed it Har-Curon. Okay, which is the idea we saw in the beginning of the story was that the forces of this newly founded Har-Curon are trying to purge any of the, the faithful, or at least, the orderly folks who were there from Anvilgard. And while the story where she takes over the city and goes against like the Storm Tower, all those things are really cool, but it's these little battles that would have happened everywhere, all over the place, as the city guard had to be taken out, that I think really paint a picture of like what actually this was. Like, this was functionally a small civil war, even though the forces that came into it, they were Morathis, and she added some new forces, so it was an attack, but also a civil war. It was kind of both. And what I like about this scene is obviously we have our hero, Haskell, who is part of the Rangers defending the city, which, by the way, if you're a Cities player, why not have these cool little auxiliary units that you make up a role for, right? I mean, obviously he's just a free guild dude, but honestly, that's a cool little spin you can put on to add some narrative flair to a unit. Anyway, so you got the Rangers there, getting absolutely decimated by the forces of Har-Curon, what they described of, having a Coven's witch, kind of have a bunch of thralls beneath her doing her bidding, and the lifeless eyes of all of her little mind slaves and that kind of stuff. I love it. I thought it was really, really cool. And then to have another elf stand up and be like, yeah, we're not all on board with this one crazy woman's plan, right? I mean, that person being Morathi, not the actual witch here. I thought it was really refreshing. It reinforces the idea that I love Scourge Privateers so flippin' much. They're so cool. I would love to actually see a small, honestly, if they came out with a little mini campaign thing, even if it was just in like a White Dwarf, that had a series of small games where you were these, disparate forces of Anvilgard versus Har-Curon, where, though they're functionally the same place, but it really is little skirmish battles of the remnants of the Anvilgard military and really just any kind of survivors, honestly, all trying desperately to either take their city back or at the very least make Morathi bleed a bit more for the loss of it. So I thought that was super rad. I want to see more of this. I want to see more of this, guerrilla warfare style stuff. I absolutely thought it was the coolest thing. So let me know your thoughts down below. If you would, how you would go about making that little mini campaign, or if you'd like to see that kind of thing. I would love to hear about it in the comments below. Thank you all so much for watching and listening, and I'll catch you in my next Age of Sigmar lore story. Happy wargaming. Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed that video. It was made possible by the folks over here to the left. These are my top supporters over here on YouTube and on Patreon that keep this channel going. If you'd like to learn more about how to become a supporter and get some cool things in the process, like exclusive pictures and interactions with me, and get your questions answered here on the channel, go ahead and click any of the links down below or the join button on the community page over on YouTube. Regardless of your choice, I wanted to thank you so much for joining me with this video, and I look forward to seeing you in my next one. Happy wargaming.